fugitive suspect in the Paris terror attacks.
Eighth suspect in the Paris attack.
The main fugitive wanted in the Paris terror attacks.
Captured alive in Belgium.
And welcome to the Hardline for March 18th, 2016. I'm John Bachman in for Ed Berliner tonight. Salah Abdeslam, a terror suspect from last November's Paris attacks, is now in French custody. We'll have much more on that in a moment. But first, we start with North Korea, where leader Kim Jong-un has ignored UN resolutions by launching medium-range missiles into the Sea of Japan. These missiles are part of a weapons program aimed at developing long-range nuclear missiles capable of reaching the United States. Let's break this down, with our first guest, Pete Hoekstra, former chair of the House Intelligence Committee and Shillman Fellow at the Investigative Project for Terrorism. Pete, always great to talk with you.
Hey, great. Thanks. Good to be with you, John.
All right. Kim Jong-un seems hell-bent on doing whatever he wants to do to be provocative and irritate the United States and the rest of the world. What will the United States do? What will the Obama administration do other than these sanctions to put him in his place?
Very, very little. I mean, we've seen what this administration will do. We've got 7 years of history. They've not done much with North Korea. Why would we expect them to change now 10 months before they leave office? They're going to continue the same course, sanctions and nothing more.
And so how far do you expect Kim Jong-un to take this? He's threatened to blow up New York with these missiles. I don't think we have that capability yet, but how far is he willing to go with it?
Oh, he's going to continue moving his program forward as quickly as possible. That includes, the missile development. There's also been reports of successful implementation of a program to miniaturize to a size that their nuclear program to a size that would fit on a ballistic missile. No, he's pressing forward as quickly as he can. There are no restraints on him to slow down that program.
Obviously, this is a concern for Japan, China, as well, other nations in Asia. What do you see them doing to push back against Kim Jong-un?
Well, they're looking for some leadership. They're looking for someone that will actually confront the North Korean leader. Right now, I think what they're waiting for is the United States and to provide them with whatever defensive capabilities we can provide them so that they can keep their territory safe. I think they'd also love it if the United States started putting pressure on China for China to use its influence in North Korea to try to slow this program down and to stop it.
Yeah, so we won't hold our breath on that front. I also want to transition and talk about this American captured in Kurdistan, the ISIS fighter. He says it was a mistake. It was just a big mistake, of course. It's a big mistake. What do you expect to happen to him once he's prosecuted?
Well, I expect the Kurds, the Kurds have been great allies with the U.S. I expect that they're going to turn him back over to U.S. authorities. He'll come back to the United States, hopefully prosecuted to the full extent. But right now, we need to see him as an intelligence asset. What can he tell us about ISIS, how they operate, who else might be there, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are? The other thing I think we really want to talk about is, hey, what exactly was your motivation to go and join ISIS? How did you pull it off? Who were you working with? But right now, he's an intelligence asset, a resource that we should mine as deeply as we can.
Yeah, Mohammed Qais, whatever his name may be, does it make any difference that he surrendered as opposed to being captured in combat, as was the case, I believe, with John Walker Lynn, the American Taliban?
I don't think so. This was a guy that was committed to killing Americans, committing and trying to kill our allies over there. No, this guy clearly is a traitor against U.S. interests. Yeah, he finally figured out this may not have been a very, very good idea. But, at one point in time, he thought it was a good idea. Secondly, he tried to kill Americans and our allies. He should be held accountable.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit more about foreign policy. Presidential candidates are starting to round out their foreign policy teams. Donald Trump advising himself. Ted Cruz, his tat, Frank Gaffney, a name that some folks know. But you, of course, are endorsing John Kasich. You're part of his campaign. Earlier this week, we heard from General Hayden, who said there's no question that John Kasich is the most qualified presidential candidate when it comes to foreign policy. Why is that not being used by more voters? Why has that not helped John Kasich?
Well, I think right now Americans are thinking primarily, we are sick and tired of foreign policy. We are sick and tired of American interventions. especially over the last 15 years. Iraq hasn't turned out very well. Afghanistan hasn't turned out very well. Libya hasn't turned out well. Syria hasn't turned out well. Africa and Yemen haven't turned out well. You would think that would then lead them to say, we really need somebody who understands this, has the temperament, the background to move forward and to get America going in the right direction. Rather than that, they're saying, we just want out of foreign policy. We don't want to talk about this anymore. Help us get jobs, get the economy moving, keep Muslims out of the country, and that kind of rhetoric. They're looking for simple solutions, and the one thing you'll find in foreign policy, there are no easy answers.
No, and no easy answers, and sometimes those answers only make things more complicated. What did you think when you heard Donald Trump answer that question by saying, I'm advising myself, I have a great mind?
One of the things that you'll find in politics or in any leader where your biggest advisor is yourself, you're in trouble, especially in the office of president. You're dealing with so many complex issues. You need a trusted group of advisors in each specialty area, whether it's foreign affairs, whether it's the economy, whether it's trade, or whether it's picking a nominee for the Supreme Court. Sure, you've got your core values and you got to trust your gut instinct. But before you go there, you need good advice from great advisors. That's the way John structured his campaign, bringing good people around him. Anyone who believes that they themselves are their best advisor on all of these issues is going to have trouble performing their role in any leadership job.
All right, well, let's go ahead and continue the conversation. I want to bring in Ian Tuttle now, who's a Buckley Fellow at the National Review Institute. We'll talk about the GOP primaries and convention in just a second. But Ian, while we have you here, this Paris terror raid, that is one of the reasons, along with San Bernardino, that this became such a campaign issue. When we see these arrests, when this stuff gets back up in the headlines, do you see it having any impact on the presidential campaign discussion?
Well, I mean, as long as it's in the news, you can count on Donald Trump probably talking about it. This has been being carried out by by Belgian authorities, so there's not any necessarily any reason that American policy factors in here, but it brings like Pete was talking about, it brings foreign policy a little more back into people's consciousness in an election that hasn't generally been focused on that, except in the way it relates to immigration and to ISIS, which I think has been perhaps the only really significant foreign policy question at issue in this primary. It makes it a little more brings those concerns back to the voter, perhaps. But again, just like Pete said, the voters seem to be focused on domestic issues and on inter-party conflicts.
Jobs, financial security, what really seems to be the most important. All right, there's still this talk. Maybe we're getting closer to a contested convention, and we're hearing about rules now within the RNC, and we're getting really down into the weeds. Things like Rule 40B. And we're going to update everybody on what that means. That is, each candidate for a nomination for President of the United States and Vice President of the United States shall demonstrate the support of a majority of the delegates from each of 8 or more states severally prior to the presentation of the name of the candidate for that nomination. Wow, that is a mouthful. Under these rules, though, only Donald Trump qualifies to be the nominee. Now, our friend David Drucker over at the Washington Examiner says, look out for 40B. If you start hearing party officials talking about Rule 40B, that would be a big sign they are moving closer to a contested convention. That rule, again, would allow the delegates to be subject to intense lobbying from these campaigns. This is what happened in 1976 that allowed Gerald Ford to beat Ronald Reagan at the GOP convention. Pete, do you see this happening this year as well?
It very, very well could. We'll see over the next, 4 to 6 weeks as this plays out. Donald Trump has a path to getting to 1,237 votes. Ted Cruz has a very, very narrow path to getting there. John Kasich could win all of the delegates that are still out there, and he'd still come up short. So, we expect John's going to do very well in the coming primaries and caucuses. He's going to increase his vote total. And pretty soon you may see Donald Trump's path to 1237 close. And at that point in time, who knows what happens between June 7 and the convention in the middle of July, When there's kind of what usually is a dead period, getting ready for the excitement of the convention, you're going to have all these candidates and their staffs talking to each other about, is there a way for any one of them to now pull together 1237 because they didn't win them outright, or is it going to be a contested convention? Contested convention, possible.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are looking at their summer vacation plans, especially if they work for these campaigns. Maybe no summer vacation for them. But Ian, let me follow up with you on that. When we're talking about things like Rule 40B of the Republican National Convention and the party platform and all this other stuff, do you think the voters will be turned off by this type of discussion? Because this is the year of the outsider, and this certainly sounds like insider talk.
Yes, it is to a certain extent. I would add a couple things. One is that the requirement that we're looking at a majority of the requirement that you need a majority of delegates to get the Republican nomination is not a rule is not a rule that anybody is making up right now. This is a rule that's always been in place. Second is the rules that prevail over any nomination are rules provisionally adopted at the previous convention. So the delegates are sovereign over this process. If they want to come in and change things the way that say a legislature changes things, when a new
but if
party
they
comes
do
into
that,
power.
if they do that, Ian, they better start educating the public about these
Sure.
rules. They need to, and I don't know if they're doing a good enough job on that, because I'm not saying they're going to be riots, but people are going to be upset if they don't really understand the process. It is detailed, and the devil is in the details. Gentlemen, thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you, John.
Always welcome back here on The Hardline. Great to be with you. We're coming back after the break. Which members of Congress help protect and save taxpayers' money? Leslie Page from Citizens Against Government Waste joins us next.